There are certain subjects in photography that seem to just naturally attract photographers. And of late, and by that I mean maybe the last dozen years or so, one of the things that seems to have attracted lots of photographers, for reasons I'm not sure I can pinpoint as an origin to the interest in frozen puddles, frozen lakes, frozen streams, frozen patterns and textures. I don't know where it all began, but gosh, we've seen a lot of them of late. We've published a number of them in the last dozen years, and they're terrific. But one of the things that happens with a subject like that is when someone publishes it, like LensWork or so many of the other magazines, once it's seen by the photographic community, then everybody wants to jump in and do their version of it. And frozen puddles and frozen streams have followed that pattern. And we've seen lots and lots of them, to the point where at some point in time, you sort of feel like you've reached a level of oversaturation. And we got that way here at LensWork, and we haven't published another frozen puddle project for quite a while, because we're looking for people who are approaching it with a different point of view, with a different sort of eye, with perhaps something we haven't seen before. And that's what really excites us. And here is an example of that. It's a frozen puddle. And Daniel Egger could have just photographed the frozen pattern of the ice on the surface and done, I'm sure, a terrific project, a nice portfolio. But that's not what this is about. This isn't a picture of frozen ice. It uses the frozen surface of the puddle or stream as a backdrop for something else. And that made this sort of interesting. It caught my attention. I looked at it a second time. And then I thought, okay, using Minor White's wisdom, what else is this? Is it a leaf and a berry and that's it? Is it a leaf and a berry frozen in time on the puddle and the surface? Is that it? No, because that's not what it reminded me of. What it reminded me of visually, from a pattern point of view, is an eye. And the leaf could be maybe a closed eyelid. And that made me think that when I'm looking out in a bright sunny day and I close my eyes, what I see is that orange ball where the light comes through my eyelid. And I don't see it in any detail, but I see it as light. And that berry sort of reminded me of that. Or I thought, well, maybe the berry is just a big yellowish eye. And the stem of that leaf is like a long eyelash or maybe mascara. Now, I'm totally doing my projection onto this image. And you may not see that and may not have that association at all. One of the interesting things about photography is how different people can interpret an image with such differences. But I'll bet when I said this reminded me of an eye or an eyelid and the berry on top is maybe the eye itself, I'll bet a lot of you could see it that way, or maybe saw it that way before I even mentioned it. And then there's this line in the ice that starts in the upper left-hand corner, comes down and then curves around and creates a facial structure sort of looking thing. Maybe it's a cheekbone, maybe it's an eye socket. Whatever it is, graphically, it pulls our eye down and around and then over to the ice and then up to the stem of the leaf, and we've got this sort of circular pattern, which is always a good thing to have in a photograph. And lastly, I find myself looking at the relationship of colors in this image, which are a little bit unexpected. The leaf is very definitely a sort of violet, purple, pale pastel color. And I'm sort of drawn to think of that as the things that were living, that were alive. That's the organic color. Until I realized that that's the same color I see in the surface of the ice in the lower right-hand corner. And the yellow, which is also a living, vibrant color, is in the opposite end of the spectrum of these two competing violets and is much closer to the dirt, the soil underneath the ice, the bottom of the puddle or the river or whatever it is that we're looking at. All these relationships give this version of the frozen patterns that Daniel Egger has captured give them something different from so many of the other portfolios we've seen that are just leaves frozen in the ice, underneath the ice, or just the ice patterns themselves. I can't quite tell by looking at it, but it almost feels as though the leaf has fallen on top of the ice. But then, how did the berry get on top of the leaf? I can find myself metaphorically asking, was the yellow in the berry attracted to the yellow in the stem? Or is this just purely 100% coincidence? Or is it 100% composition by the photographer who positioned the leaf and positioned the berry? And so what if it is? It's a photograph that's more than just frozen patterns in the ice, more than just leaves on the forest floor, more than just berries. It's about a relationship between all of these elements and the joy of finding them when you're a photographer. This is the kind of stuff that photographers look for when they're out in the field. They look for these kinds of relationships. And when you find them, for me anyway, it's all kinds of fun to photograph them and let my imagination run a little bit, so that it's not just a picture of ice and leaf and berry, but it's an eyeball, it's a relationship, it's an attraction between these elements that come together that makes for an interesting photograph that shows us what is while simultaneously engaging our imagination.